I don't know how long Chris has been there. Chris, I've been just kind of going on a rant looking at some other things. How long have you been there, bud?
A couple minutes. I like it long enough to hear the passion. I mean, I feel like you're giving a speech to Gamecock Nation here, man. So I'm here for it. I enjoyed getting to listen to a little of that fire and brimstone speech.
Well, as I've told you, I mean, Coach Yuva, he's getting ready for a big week 2 matchup, his 40th year of coaching football. So I was talking to him this afternoon. So that's probably where it came from.
That's awesome. I love it. But I agree with you. You know, I actually talked to Coach Chiswick after the North Carolina game, and he told me early on we knew we could stop the run. It just now it became a matter of just getting after the quarterback. And so as soon as every defensive coordinator you talk to before the game, they're going to tell you, hey, what's the number one goal? Stop the run. Try to make them one-dimensional. And it's even more so the indication here. Like, if you know Spencer Rattler's going to have to drop back and throw the football every single down, makes it easy as hell for the defense. And that's where, you know, your front seven starts really licking their lips.
What has been just the perception of people like yourself from the national standpoint of watching what Rattler has done? I know we've talked about the offensive line just in our conversations off camera, but that aside, just what he has been able to do so far, especially this past game. And, you know, it's an FCS team, but at the end of the day, you're still putting up some pretty impressive numbers, only 2 incompletions.
Yeah, what do you throw, 27, 28 times or something like that, and 2 incompletions?
Yeah, like 25 of 27.
That's great against air, bro. And I don't care what level of opponent you're playing. It's tough to complete 92 or whatever percent that actually is. But, you know, I've been impressed with him. And it was interesting last year. I felt like, especially early on, he was trying to press too much, like live up to this expectation that everybody else had kind of set for him and he had set for himself. But, you know, when everything kind of came together and you let the game come to you, you know, he started to be able to really excel in the last couple of weeks of the season. And I feel like despite all of the pressure that he's been under, despite, you know, not a whole lot of run game helping him out, he has shouldered the entire offensive effort that this team has had through 2 weeks. So I've been really impressed with not only the numbers he's put up, but I think more so the resiliency and the toughness. I mean, some of those shots he took in the first game of the season, you know, I think it would have deterred a lot of other people, but he kept getting up, kept going back to the huddle, kept dropping back and trying to bring his team back in the game, despite that looking less and less likely as it went on.
We were just talking about it before you hopped on. I know you got to hear some of it talking about the run game. You've seen Georgia. You've seen this team over the last 2 years. Is it the same Georgia team from the last 2 years? Maybe not, but at the same time, too, you got to respect them. I mean, until someone takes them down, until someone gives them a chance to say that they're not the champ anymore, and it's tough because of the competition that they've played through the first 2 weeks. I say that, though, Chris, because as talented as Rattler is there anything else outside of Rattler just having the game of his life this weekend that it would take in order for South Carolina to do something they haven't been able to do since 2019?
Yeah.
That's being able to win in Athens.
I'm glad you mentioned 2019 because I think that's the exact recipe for how you win this year. It's not going to be necessarily by winning it, scoring a bunch of points offensively. And we can say what we want. I'm not sure what Georgia is, to be honest with you. I don't know after 2 games and the opponents they played what they're going to be. I'm a little gun shy about the SEC as a whole because of what we've seen in the first 2 weeks of the season. I think we'll get a better idea of what Georgia is on Saturday against South Carolina. But we know they recruit really, really well. And we know they have guys that are interchangeable. We know the type of players they look for. So if any indication of what their defense looked like last year and the year before, or what these guys are being recruited and developed to look like, then I imagine they're going to be pretty good. And that's even without a deficiency on the offensive line that we expect to see with South Carolina's performance in week 1. But I think you look at it, I mean, what better team out there to pull off an upset with that 2019 script than Shane Beamer's 2023 team? I think you got to score a non-offensive touchdown like you did with Israel Mukwamu's pick 6 in that ball game. You got to be good in special teams, which I thought that South Carolina was back in 2019. And you got to be able to create pressure on the quarterback. Jake Fromm threw a bunch of interceptions in that game because the defense was able to get pressure. Now, they didn't do much of that against Drake May in the opener, but can you find a way? Can Clayton White develop some sort of pass rush that's going to force some interceptions? Carson Beck, you catch him at a great time. Like, who knows what he is? If you're playing him in November, maybe it's a different story. But right now, he hadn't been tested much. You know, the offense has taken some slow starts to get going in the first 2 weeks of the season. I think it's a great opportunity for the defense to set the tone, force some of those turnovers, maybe even score themselves. But it needs to be a lower scoring game that you force, maybe win the turnover margin by 3 or 4, like 2019-10 did.
You said that at this point, through the first 2 games of the year, it's still hard to figure out who this Georgia team is. Outside of what we just talked about with Rattler having to do that, what are some of the areas of maybe, I wouldn't say concern, but are questions still about Georgia and that South Carolina perhaps could have some success being able to go up against some of those areas?
It's funny to say because we've always kind of relied on Kirby Smart's teams being able to run the football, but with as much as they've had injuries affect them at the running back spot, we don't know the health of Dejon Edwards. Kendall Milton hadn't looked 100% this season. So who's running the ball for them, and how effective are they if it is one of those guys that hadn't had to carry the ball 20 times a game? And then I look at the fact that Ladd McConkey, I mean, the more that lingers on, and there's evidently the report is that he may not play in this one too. That's a big loss. Now, Mekhi Muse has been great in kind of filling in some of that role in the punt return duties and had a big touchdown reception in game 1. But there's certainly it's a weird situation with where Georgia is, not having played any real competition in the first 2 weeks. Carson Beck still kind of trying to get his feet under him, having all of the injuries impact you at this time of year. I really don't think you have a good feel for exactly who Georgia is. That's not to say they can't go out and win a national championship. I predicted in the preseason they would, but with all of those things right now factored in, I think it's a great time for South Carolina to catch Georgia, and I'm really not sure if they even know what their identity is going to be this year yet.
There's been a lot of people talking about Spencer Rattler, and rightfully so, but Xavier Legette, especially with Juice Wells not being in the lineup, or at least not playing that many snaps so far, he has really come onto the scene, and he's played out of his absolute mind. What's just the talk around the country about that young man and what he's been able to do so far through 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? You can ask the question like, man, where did this guy come from? Or you can ask the question of, like, where has this guy been? I mean, he has all the tools to have, showed out this way before the season, but has been mediocre at best throughout his career at South Carolina. To me, and have you know this, you've been around a lot of football players. Like at some point in time, the light switch flips, right? And you realize you're running out of time. And now all of a sudden you hit with this sense of urgency. I've seen it with my teammates in the past where maybe they didn't take it as seriously. Maybe they didn't dedicate to their craft. Maybe they had other distractions going on. Maybe it just was slow in terms of being able to grasp everything you're being asked to do. But watching him, the way that he attacks the football, I mean, obviously he's got great athletic ability, but watching him go up and get the football the way that he did in that North Carolina game, three times it seemed like, I'm really impressed with him. And I wonder what this offense will look like when you get Juice Wells back to 100%. Like the focal point of the defense cannot just be on Wells like I think it was at times last year. With Legette, you have to be concerned about the ability for him to beat you on a deep ball, and certainly I think he'll draw a little bit more one-on-one coverage because of what Wells can do once he's fully healthy.
Yeah, Shane has really been hush-hush on Juice Wells, and I say it to people all the time, especially our listeners. This is the difference with the NFL. You don't have to put an injury report out there. The only thing that we know, and I don't think it's been reported publicly, is, and we've said it on our program, is that he's dealing with a toe injury. And, at some point, how much pain can he play through? And I think that plays a part into it. I bring that up, though, because with this offense, whether Juice is out there, whether Juice isn't out there, and again, it's a small sample size, just like we can say about Georgia and any team through 2 games at this point. What has impressed you the most, though, and it's tough after that first game, but what has impressed you the most so far with what South Carolina is trying to do from an offensive standpoint? Because it wasn't until the Tennessee game last year, it wasn't until the Clemson game last year that they started to really play free. And I know that was something that was said a lot because of former offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield, and it's easy to throw everything back on him, but there seems like there is a difference with what Dal Loggins is trying to do with this offense.
Yeah, my favorite part of it is going back to what we talked about earlier, that Spencer Rattler, the confidence with which he's playing, the unflappability which he seems to have, despite things maybe not going the way that you like to as a quarterback. It's easy to get frustrated when your offensive line's not blocking for you. But he kept fighting. That perseverance at the end of that North Carolina game was something that really stood out to me. So clearly, he and Dow Loggins, they talked about their connection in the preseason, how much fun Spencer was having in practice. And, I think that's one of the most fascinating dynamics of this game. Like knowing that you're at a deficiency on the offensive line versus, one of the best pass rush groups you'll play all year long. What do you do to compensate for that? I think, Dow Loggins clearly has to get the ball out of Spencer's hand quickly. You talked about hitting a bunch of deep balls. You're not going to have a chance to just drop 5-7 step drops and throw the football down the field. So you got to pick your spots. I think this idea that you're going to, max protect or bring a bunch of guys in, and that just brings more defenders to the party. So let's keep spread out. Let's move the pocket at times and not allow the defensive rush to know where the launch point's going to be. But definitely got to get the run game going too, just so you don't fall into that trap of being one-dimensional and feeling like you're having to throw, especially playing from behind.
Beamer hasn't officially announced who the starting offensive lineman will be this week. And we get I always say I have the two deep in front of me. I said this thing means nothing because last week it was completely different. But I say that because there's a possibility that we see two true freshmen on the offensive line that had a chance to get in last week, Oluwatosin Babalade and Trevon Bob. As freshmen, it's one thing to be able to get your first game under your belt at home, like they did last week and against Furman. It's another to go on the road, especially in an environment like that at Georgia next week, contrary to what Kirby Smart is saying and poor Tonka Hemingway catching strays from SEC Media Day. But I bring that up, though, Chris. What do you remember early in your career? It was some of these younger guys going in there. It could have been just another freshman going in there. It could have been your first opportunity playing in your first SEC road game. What is something that these guys are going to have to get prepared for the best they can? What are some of those things you think?
No, I'll speak to, the perspective that I have. 92 was my redshirt freshman year. That class, James Bates, Danny Warfel were in that class that came in 92, the year after I got there. But it also was filled with a couple highly regarded recruits on the offensive line, Jason Odom and Reggie Green. Early in the year, those guys got thrown into the fire. We had to go to Tennessee, I think, in week 2 or week 3 maybe, and they certainly took their lumps in that game. And I don't think of a more difficult position to play than tackle in the SEC on the road in one of those loud venues like that. But those guys kind of held their own, and they got better, and it paid dividends as things went on. I always believe that if it's equal, you're better off going with the young guy just because of what that's going to do to help the development of your program. And I don't know the personalities of these young offensive linemen there in Columbia, but, you hope that they're guys that are competitive, that want to come out and fight, that understand that they're going to take some lumps and have to move on from it. But it's certainly I don't envy anybody having to block some of the edge rushers here in this conference, or even the interior linemen for that matter.
Chris, we've talked about this with former Gamecock players over the last couple of weeks, but can you just speak on the fact of when you are a young player, and some players will redshirt, and Shane Beamer went down the list, I think actually heading into the North Carolina game, like the number of starters for South Carolina, specifically on the offensive side, but he's like Spencer Rattler, Vershawn Lee, went down this list of names. There's this notion, especially now with how recruiting is and how we cover it, obviously at On3, and you have the other recruiting sites. These fans know who these players are. They know 5 stars, 4 stars. They know how fast they run. They want to see some of these younger guys in there. And if they don't see them in there right away, they start to worry. I bring that up just because how much can 2 weeks of in-season practices, how much can that make a difference? And do you think, with this South Carolina team, as you said, we're seeing with the offensive line, would you expect to see more younger players as the course of the season goes on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the expectation, unless for some miracle you're able to get a combination here with some veteran guys that get things shored up here week 3 or week 4. But it's funny. You go back when I was in school, virtually everybody got redshirted, and very few people knew the ins and outs of these recruits and their lives before getting on campus. I think it was actually a blessing for me walking on originally. Like, nobody really expected a ton from me. I didn't have that pressure that everybody else had kind of put on me. So from that perspective, I think it was a little advantageous. But I can tell you, the only way to get better is to get reps. Just like anything else in life, the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And I can remember getting in there, as a redshirt freshman in '92, and feeling, like, wow, this is crazy. Everything's fast. It's a lot tougher than I imagined. And then, the more you play, the better you feel about it. Having a great spring, and then coming back in '93 and you catch that first touchdown, and now all of a sudden you're like, man, I could do this. And so part of it is you think but until you actually do it, you probably don't really know. And so getting some success, it's important to have some success for young guys early on to help, get that feeling solidified. Now, going back to what you said, a completely different dynamic. The fans do know, and they do want it. It's almost like the backup quarterback. Everybody's favorite player is the backup quarterback. It's the shiny new toy. And I think now that's spread to everywhere else. The new recruits coming in, they're going to help our program. It's, these guys were hyped up in high school. They're going to come in and deliver. But there's also the thing of, like, we better play him some so he doesn't get in the transfer portal. Like that I can't even imagine that dynamic as a coach, trying to placate kids that you probably promised a lot to when they were coming out of high school that may or may not be ready based upon what you've seen in camp, but you want to keep them around, and you got to find a way to keep the family happy. You got to keep the other handlers, from looking for other opportunities.
Have you talked to coaches about that? Have you talked to coaches across the conference maybe, and just have they kind of relayed that to you, how they've had to kind of change their approach with certain things?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've had to change their approach considerably. I mean, you're constantly re-recruiting your roster every single day. I mean, and
But
I don't think
retention.
yeah, Kirby Smart's done it better than anybody else. I don't know how he's been able to do it as well as he has, but he's talked about the connection that he has. Continuing to build it with their families. I think it's important that you do that. How many families end up getting in their kids to shoot? We saw at Florida, Travis Etienne getting in his brother's ear about, oh man, you should transfer out there to play with Coach Prime. Like, families, everybody's got something they want to say. But I think the thing that most of the coaches are most upset about is the tampering behind the scenes. And I think that's every coach you talk to says there needs to be something to enforce the rules more and eliminate the tampering that's taken on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, I had a conversation with former Clemson quarterback Taj Boyd, who I've been able to develop a good relationship over the last couple of years. And he's like, Mike and Chris, this isn't anything that you don't know. Everything that used to happen in the back door is just happening in the front now. And the NCAA just doesn't care because they can't police it. Or at least so far, they haven't been able to police it.
Well, they don't want to police it because they're afraid of, some sort of lawsuits. They pick their battles. The North Carolina receiver that's just ridiculous that they're not letting this guy have eligibility with the circumstances surrounding that. They'll pick their battles that they think they can win.
Yep.
Yeah, and they throw their hands up to things that could potentially end in litigation.
Mm-hmm. It goes without saying, but we'll hear you say it. How big would this mean for South Carolina to be able to go get a win? And how big would this be for Shane Beamer in year 3?
Yeah, you know what? As I look at it, I'm thinking, man, there's no chance. South Carolina has zero chance of winning this game. But it's the same feeling I had when Tennessee came to town at the end of the year last year. I thought Tennessee would roll over South Carolina, especially with the Gamecocks coming off that loss here in Gainesville to the Gators, where they didn't even score an offensive point. Like, it seems bleak, but for whatever reason, Shane Beamer seems to be at his best when the chips are down like that. And I don't know if there's anybody that I've seen that's been able to rally the troops the way that Coach Beamer has. So maybe there's a message, maybe there's a plan, maybe there's something that they can do to catch Georgia off guard. As I said earlier, I'd rather play this Georgia team now than play them in November, given where we think that their evolution will be by that time. But it seems unlikely, but that Clemson upset last year seems a lot more unlikely than this one.
I don't want to hold you up all day because I know you got to hit the road, get ready. What game you going to be covering?
I'm in the studio. I'm in the studio every week, so
you are okay.
Easy. Yeah, I'm in.
Is that different now?
No, you know what? I've been in the studio. This is my 9th year with the SEC Network. I've done pretty much primarily the studio stuff, but I have, I got to call a couple of those Gamecock games for the openers in the last 2 seasons. This year, the opponent was a little too high class for me to be able to get the call on that one. But it's easy because I'm in Charlotte. I can drive down to Columbia and knock that out. But yeah, I'm all studio stuff this year.
Well, you'll have an opportunity to see everything this weekend then. But what I was going to ask you is, and I have to bring it up, and you know how it goes. You're never going to make every fan base happy. But there were some people in this Gamecock fan base that were upset. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was the panic meter. And I think you had the panic meter going through the roof for South Carolina week 1. Again, it's what you saw out there. I mean, the way that we graded the performance, we go back, we watch the tape as if we're coaches, and we try to grade things out, and it wasn't good. Again, it was an FCS team last week, a good FCS team, but strength, size, speed, overtime, it did what you would expect South Carolina to do against an FCS team like that. What do you need to see from South Carolina? And I know Gamecock fans aren't going to want to hear moral victories, but what do you want to see from them this weekend to be able to feel better about the direction that they're heading in, at least where they are right now in year 3?
It was interesting after week 1 because the 3 losers in our conference, Florida, South Carolina, LSU, all had games against opponents that were far inferior to them. But I think it was perfect for each of those teams, a chance to not only come back, get some confidence, get some momentum going, but also, try to work to clean up some of the things that undermined your efforts in week 1. So I think there was a lot to be positive about in the Furman game. A little slow start for them, but that was kind of the common theme throughout the SEC last week. Going back to what your question about the panic meter, I was panicked because the offensive line, looking as bad as it did against North Carolina, and no offense to Chiz and Mac Brown, but those defensive fronts are nothing compared to what you're going to play with the best of these teams. And by the way, the best of them is what you got on the schedule this week. So, if you can show me that you've shuffled some things around and you're able to protect better, if you can show me that you are doing some things differently schematically, that'll help shore up the protection. I mean, part of my panic meter is Spencer Rattler can't hang up. You keep taking hits like that, you're going to inevitably get hurt. So, unfortunately, in college football, you can't go to free agency in the season. You can't make a trade. You kind of are stuck with who you have, and you got to find a way to make it work. So I in a league that we've always talked about being primarily about the line of scrimmage, when you're having as poor of effort as you did on the offensive line and the defensive line doing nothing to impact Drake May in that game, that made me very panicked. So show me that you can be better on the lines of scrimmage this week against a very good test in the Georgia Bulldogs.
How big of an opportunity is this for Rattler from a draft standpoint?
I mean, it's a huge opportunity for everybody, and I think that's probably what Coach Beamer has been talking to the team about. There's no pressure. Let's go take advantage of this opportunity, man. Go play in a venue that is iconic in college football. Let's shock these guys. And I think you've seen Spencer Rattler, as I said earlier, playing free and not putting the pressure on himself that he did when he first got to Columbia last year. You're able to do it against these guys. It says something because the first round of the NFL draft the last couple of years have been littered with Georgia defenders. Now, the problem with playing quarterback, and people used to ask me why I didn't play quarterback, you have no control. You could take your steps, you could throw it to the right spot, you could throw it with great accuracy, and at the end of the day, if the guy either doesn't get open or doesn't catch the ball, then it shows up as an incompletion on your stat sheet. So, he's going to need some help, not only from the offensive line, but the receivers getting open and making plays. He's going to need help from the running backs to help take some of the pressure off him in the run game, to help pick up some of the rushers that inevitably are going to be sent by Glenn Schumann's defense and Will Muschamp. So it's a great opportunity, but it's going to take the entire team. It's not a Spencer Rattler only thing.
No, that's why you played receiver, and for at least one season until your teammate broke it, you led the SEC in receiving touchdowns.
Hold on now. I had the SEC record for 25 years for a season now. The career record, I'm sorry, for the career I had it. 31 touchdowns was the record until Amari Cooper broke it 25 years later. My partner, Riddell Anthony, did break the season record. But let's be honest, Mike, if you had to hold one, wouldn't you rather have the career than the season record?
Career sounds better to me. I mean, career sounds better to me. I was going to use a baseball analogy, but all those analogies have an asterisk next to it. I mean, everyone knew as a kid, how many home runs did Hank Aaron hit in the season? How many, hits in a row did Joe DiMaggio have? Everyone knew all these different records, but baseball probably not the best to use right now.
Roger Maris lived here in Gainesville. His son Kevin was my coach, so we knew 61 and 61 very well here in Gainesville.
Well, Chris, appreciate you hopping on. Again, you can catch Chris Doering Saturday. Catch him Saturday. I mean, catch him tomorrow too. I mean, you guys go on early tomorrow, correct?
Yeah, 8 to 11, me and PB on the SEC this morning, and then we'll do the night show. Benjamin Watson, Dari Noka, myself, SEC Now. I think it's either 7 or 9. I'm not sure what time we're on, depending on volleyball and some other fall sports. And then Saturday all day, man, with the triple header, we'll be on intermittently doing your halftime and post-game updates, man.
Awesome. I'm actually hopping on with Dari and Aaron Murray at 4:30, so I'll try to hold. I'll try to do a little home and home here.
Let me say this real quick before I go, man. And behind the scenes, if there's information that I need about what's going on with the Gamecocks, you're the guy that I call, and you're always great and help keeping me up to speed as a national or a more regional guy. We don't have that same sort of pipeline for information a lot. So I value you as a friend. I value you for a guy that can help keep me informed, and you do a great job here on the show, man.
No, I appreciate it, Chris. We'll grab some drinks soon. I mean, we're not too far. Charlotte and Columbia.
Let's do it. I'm waiting on that. I'm waiting on the Bojangles, bro. Let's do both.